All right, welcome to our next video in our series for programming in Snap. We get to start using a brand new tool today, which is we're going to be talking about variables. We're doing variables. I've included the question I normally pose to my students at the start of this unit. If you want to go look up that trivia about the famous mathematician, Mr. Rene Descartes, as we call him sometimes, or Rene Descartes. You're welcome to go do that. So we're going to talk about variables today. So when we look back at some of the blocks that we know about, we've been able to manipulate the sprite around the screen. We have used various control blocks to make that easier. We can repeat actions with the repeater we've used forever. And one of the more recent tools we acquired was ask and answer. The job of ask and answer was to ask the user for a question, ask the user for some information, and then store that in an answer predicate, one of those rounded blocks, an answer reporter. And then we could use that answer to help change an output. And this was something we did in Lab 6, where we would ask the user, how many sides do you want to your shape? They would give us an answer, and then we could use the answer reporter in the repeat block to make a certain size of polygon. Well, the question's going to come up, what if we need to store more than just one answer? What if the user is giving us information and we need to track not just what they said once, but we need to track a bunch of pieces of information? And maybe there are a bunch of different kinds of information. Maybe it's numbers, maybe it's words, maybe it's a true-false value. How do we address that problem? So I want to take you all the way back. This is all the way back to my childhood, late 80s, early 90s, when I was playing a lot of Legend of Zelda, the original. And this is for the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. It blows my mind that this game is, I think, 30 plus years old now. But I find it to be a really great way to express why we need variables in programming. And just in this one screenshot, which is, I think, within the first 5 minutes of playing the game, you get the sword and then you start running around to different screens battling enemies. We can see right away a lot of different variables that we would use. You can see some numbers on the screen, which I think are most clearly variables, right? The amount of money that Link has accumulated. I want to say in the world of Hyrule, which is where Zelda and Link live, that I think they're called rupees is their money. So we can see that Link has 36 rupees, 0 keys, 7 bombs. So those are all variables that would need to be kept. It's not something that just one answer block could keep. But there's also, if we went to look at the underpinnings of this video game, there's a bunch of other small variables being used that maybe aren't quite so obvious. Link's health, right? So health in Zelda is split into half hearts. So and you see that we have 2 hearts for Link right now. And so there's probably some kind of a health meter somewhere with a variable representing maximum health, which changes over the course of the game. The current health would be its own variable. It's probably a current health of 4 heart halves out of 8 heart halves, something like that. But even more than that, you would think, well, also the enemies probably have a health. How many hits with a sword does it take before they disappear? And then there's whole other variables that could exist, like what is the location of each of these objects, right? They probably all have an X and Y coordinate on the grid. And a whole bunch of other stuff. Are they alive or dead? That would be a true-false value. So anyway, if we want to make any kind of a complex output, we're going to want to be storing information, and you can't store information without a variable. And it's worth noting that stored information in variables basically comes in Snap in a few forms. We can store text, so it could be a letter, a word, many words. We could store numbers, both whole numbers and decimal numbers. We can store true-false values. And those are the most basic things we can store in variables. You can do other advanced things later, like you can store a sprite into a variable, which is a cool trick we'll talk about in cloning. But a lot of different kinds of things you can store in a variable. So we're going to head over to Snap in a moment to check out these tools, but these are the new blocks that you're going to be using. To make a variable, you have to create one and name it. There's a few different kinds of variables you can make, which I'll address in just a second. And then you can set a variable score, so it'll disregard whatever the variable value was before, and it'll just change it to the new set value. You can change a variable value. So if it's numerical and you say change by 1, it'll go find what the value was before, and then it will update it by 1. So if it was 5 before, it'll become 6. It's also true that in some programs, you want to be able to display your variable to the screen. So sometimes we will choose to show a variable, sometimes we will choose to hide a variable. Script variable I will talk about in the demonstration in just a second. But basically the purpose of a script variable is to exist just for one script, and then as soon as that script is done, the variable ceases to exist. It's kind of a temporary local variable. This may be a way to describe it. All right, so what if we wanted to make a program that adds two random numbers together? What would that look like? So suppose I wanted to simulate the rolling of two dice. And something I glossed over is there's a green block. It's a reporter. It's in the operator category. It allows you to get random numbers. This is something you're going to need for our next lab, which is called Guessing Game. So let's say the purpose of my program here is to take two numbers that simulate the roll of dice and to add them together and to see what we get. Well, what I'm going to do is I'll head over to variables, and I'm going to go ahead and name a variable. I'm going to name it roll1. I got to this screen by clicking make a variable, and you can see that we can change a variable's visibility, or the programming term for this is called scope. What scope is the parts of your program where a variable is visible. And there's basically 3 levels of scope. This is a big takeaway, so if you're taking notes, I would write this down right here. A variable can have a scope of all sprites, so it's for your entire project, meaning that this sprite and any others could see it. It could have a scope of just this sprite, so this variable will live just with this sprite and others can't see it. Or a variable can have a scope of just one script. So not only can this just be seen by just this sprite, wherever I attach this variable, this is the only place it'll be seen. So I'm going to go ahead and make a global variable for right now. I'll call it roll1. Whoops. Roll1. I'll make another variable. We'll call that roll2. And when the program starts, I am going to go ahead and assign each of those. I'll say, hey, roll1, your value is going to be between 1 and 6. And hey, roll2, your value is going to be between 1 and 6. Perfect. And then once we have rolled both of those dice, got those random numbers, I will go ahead and display roll1 plus roll2. Now, I know there's probably some clever students watching this saying, we could have just combined all 3 of those lines of code into one by saying, say, pick random 1 to 6 plus pick random 1 to 6. And that's true. But I wanted to show this version to make sure we understood how variables worked. So when I click go, it'll give me 7, which it's kind of fitting because 7 is the most common number when you roll 2 dice together. But we should be able to see, as I keep clicking, it should give, there we go, any combination of numbers between 2 and 12. We see an 8, there was an 11 earlier, there was a 5. We see the numbers in the middle are more common. I'm looking to see if I can get one of those extreme ends. Either there's a 2, and we'd probably have to click, right? There's a 1 in 36 chance of a 2 and a 1 in 36 chance of a 12, right? So we see that those aren't very common. If at some point in the program, we decided to make a variable, I'll just call this variable x for right now, and I wanted to store something there, perhaps we ask the user, what's your favorite number? Well, we could, I'm realizing X is not a great name for that, so I'm going to go ahead and delete X, and we're going to make a new variable called favorite number, and we can set favorite number to whatever their answer is. And now, when we ask them the question, what's your favorite number, it gets stored not just in answer, but in this variable favorite number. So if I ask what's your favorite number, if I say 5, and I go look what's stored in favorite number, it's going to be 5. So variables, very powerful, a way of preserving information. And it's something that you can, whenever you need to access it, you can grab the reporter and you can change the values using set or change. And if you'd like, you can show or hide. Notice how favorite number is on the screen right now. When I click hide variable, boop, it disappears. And when I click show favorite number, boop, it reappears. All right, that's the basics of variables.